Welcome everyone to the RPG Goblin, where I bring on guests, break down games, and make learning and exploring TTRPGs fun and easy for you, so that you don't have to worry about the hassle of trying to find the right game and even know what it's about before you buy it. In today's episode, we are going to be talking about Black Paper Moon, and I am so excited because this game is absolutely adorable. If you want something perfect for a cute, one-off Halloween one-shot where you all play a bunch of monster hunters with really cool weapons, then you will love this episode. Even though it's great for one-shots, it can absolutely be played in long-term games, and it's just fantastic. I love learning about it in this episode, and it's just so cool how the different powers, weapons, and people all work together to create this amazing game experience. In today's episode, I brought on the creator of Black Paper Moon, Vincent Baker, not the one from Apocalypse World, to talk about it with me. And he shares insight of inspiration behind Black Paper Moon, the process of creating the game, and we even break down the mechanics and how to play it itself. And it's absolutely fantastic. So if that sounds like a good time, then come join us and let's get into it. Welcome, everyone, to the RPG Goblin, where we make exploring TTRPGs fun and easy. I am your host, Willow, the resident goblin and the one who asks all the questions. And today's episode, I am very, very excited because we actually have another game creator on to talk about his game, Black Paper Moon. To be specific, Vincent Baker, not the one from Apocalypse World, but Vincent Baker is our guest. If you would like to introduce yourself, Vincent, please go ahead.
Hello, I'm happy to be here. And if you could not have guessed, my name is indeed Vincent. I am a game designer. I've made tabletop RPGs, which is what I'm here for. I've also made some card games. I've also dabbled with some video game stuff. I went to school for game design, and it was in the process of building video games that I learned that my true passion was with tabletop RPGs and card games, because I hate programming and I hate doing 3D models and all that stuff. It's very like learning someone else's like math language and trying to input that. And I'm way more on the artistic like writing side. And so I was like, you know what? And I have a background like where I played a ton of like TCGs. I've played a ton of tabletop RPGs, all that fun stuff. So it just feels so natural, and I'm happy to be here. So thank you for inviting me on to the podcast, discuss Black Paper Moon and some of the other stuff I got going on.
Yeah, absolutely. I am super excited to have you on, especially about Black Paper Moon. I'm super, super excited to delve into that. But first, you mentioned kind of having your background in, tabletop games already. I'm curious of your experience with tabletop games so far. Like, what have you played? Just your general experience there.
Okay, so my history with tabletop games before I got into making them?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So growing up, my dad is actually a pretty cool like nerd type of guy, and he grew up playing like the first Final Fantasy. He grew up playing like he like made sure I had like an Atari, a Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, all this stuff. And so I played a ton of video games, a lot of Mario, Final Fantasy, Pokemon, all that stuff. And I immediately got into Pokemon, the TCG, whenever that came out, because I believe it came over here in the West when I was 7 years old. And so I was like at the prime age to get those cards. And whereas most kids my age just collected the cards, I actually learned the game. I was playing it, I was building decks. I was like super into it. Yu-Gi-Oh came out. I started playing Yu-Gi-Oh. I was building decks for Yu-Gi-Oh. My dad played that with me, and him and I would go up to our different like local game stores and we'd play in tournaments. He helped me collect the entire first set of Yu-Gi-Oh, which I still have. And then I found,
cool.
I have so many like old like Yu-Gi-Oh cards, and I still held on to them. And then I found his old stash of Magic the Gathering cards, and so I asked him about that, and so we both got into Magic the Gathering. And it got to the point where he literally paid a pro Magic the Gathering player, like tutored him or paid him to tutor me to play Magic at a professional level. So, and that was, and that was me when I was like 10 years old, like 10 to 11. And I basically traveled around like to a bunch of different like regional events. And they had this thing called the Junior Super Series, where you could only compete if you're 15 or younger. And so some of the biggest events I went to for that had like 1,000+ people. And every single one, I managed to be in the top 4 or top 8. Maybe there might be a couple I was like in the top 8 instead of the top 4. But in general, I placed pretty highly. I was like really competitive, which is funny because at such a young age, I was like highly competitive with like trading card games. But now a bit
Mhm.
older, I can still be competitive, but I'm sort of known with Vindicated for making games that are easy for people to learn, easy for people to play.
Mhm.
And a lot of them, I think of it as like emergent gameplay where it's like the rules and the basics are very easy to jump into, but there's a lot more beneath that surface. So there's a lot there if you're someone who likes to strategize or have depth, but the basic mechanics are super easy to jump into. So yeah, like I said, I have
Mhm.
mostly a TCG background, which I think makes some of my non-TCG games have a different perspective to them. So
Yeah,
yeah, so there's
absolutely.
that. And of course, I did play some D&D growing up. My dad like really cared to make it immersive, and for the bit that we played, he actually had decorated a whole like bedroom, and he'd like
Aw.
redecorate it based off of like he'd say, okay, well your characters enter into this like shop, and but it's like dusty and like abandoned, and like he actually made the room look like that, and whatever we found like in real life like would carry over to like what it would be. Uh,
That's
yeah,
so
so my
cool.
dad would be like super into it. So that's just like how I was raised. And as far as board games go, I don't think I played any like super interesting board games growing up. I just kind of played, I don't know, I played some of the standard stuff. But I'm not really sure what got me into that side of things, but yeah, I don't know. There you go. There's my random assortment of, of history.
Absolutely. So it seems like you haven't had the most tabletop experience, which is actually kind of interesting because I've found a few instances where I've met game designers who haven't played a bunch before they've actually gone into designing a game. And I'm curious why, why did you make that jump to go into designing a game before playing, you know, for years and years and years?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So a lot of that history I just covered was sort of like since since I was a little kid all the way up until I was a
Mhm.
teenager. When I got into designing Otherworlds, which was like my first tabletop RPG endeavor,
Mhm.
that was basically 13 years ago. And what sort of had me in line with making that was okay. So I got to try to backtrack this and connect it. Okay, so my sister and I played the original Mario video game, and we loved that game, but we couldn't really explore the Mario world. It was very like 2D and very like one player. You run from
Mhm.
one end to the other. But me and my sister loved it, so I created sort of this like board game with like role playing elements where we could find
Mhm.
NPCs and like I would role play as them, and we talk about it. And all this
Oh,
was
that's
just
fun.
something that came naturally to me without me knowing what a role playing game was,
Mhm.
but I understood the idea of like, I think kids understand the idea of like pretending they're Batman or whatever. So I was
Mhm.
just basically doing that, and I didn't understand what a role playing game was, but I was doing it anyways. And growing up, becoming a teenager, young kid, I had made this game called Otherworlds, which is basically like LARPing. Like me and my friends would run around, we'd have weapons, we'd go on quests and missions, we would like earn money, we'd talk to NPCs, we'd like travel to different worlds, and we'd basically LARP
Oh, that
everything
sounds so
out.
fun.
Yeah, it was, and my friends just really knew me as like being this like very like like creative guy that could just throw together these systems and mechanics to like have fun.
Mhm.
And I really didn't know about the, I guess, the more like company like or like just actually like making an official game or whatever. But as I got
Mhm.
older and as I was like a young adult, I was making other worlds, and to your point, at that time, I hadn't played a lot of tabletop role playing games, but I knew that that's what made sense for Otherworlds. So I sort of
Mhm.
designed the shell of Otherworlds and sort of like the core mechanics of what I wanted it to be. But of course, being someone that was not as experienced in terms of like playing what other people have played, I think it gave me a unique take and perspective, which I appreciate.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but alternatively, the issue that you can run into is you can run into pitfalls that people have already sort of solved, like in the industry, and there's already
Mhm.
like things where people might already be like a decade, ahead of you, where they're like, dude, you're still doing that, even though like we've already learned that that's not fun to do or this or that. So
Mhm.
I basically made the initial basics of Otherworlds and with my fresh take and how I would do it, and then I ended up getting into playing some other tabletop RPGs to give me a more balanced perspective. So I did dive more into D&D. They had fifth edition that came out. I played Fantasy Age. I looked into Numenera, Pathfinder. I think of what other ones were out there. No, basically, I looked at a lot of them. I know Fragged Empire was like super cool, and I looked at how they were doing things. And now I get to talk with Wade, and he's an awesome guy. So that's kind of neat. But yeah, there's like, and there's a lot of like sort of like other indie RPGs that I just checked out, and I read the rules. I didn't really get to play them, but I was like just seeing like what sort of like the big guys were doing in the industry and some of the indie people were doing.
Mhm.
And so that helped sort of fill in some of the gaps or fix some of the issues I was having from making a game without seeing other people's work. But I think Otherworlds became
Mhm.
something interesting because I was able to sort of combine my like my naive but like my fresh perspective and combine that with something that is like wisdom from other people.
Yeah, I think that is fantastic. That is really, really cool. And now it's making me really interested to hear more about other worlds, which maybe we need to do another episode or something about that, because that would be awesome to hear more of the thought process and the design process behind that. But I think you are exactly right. I think it's insanely interesting bringing in that fresh perspective of not a lot of experience and basically what you would come up with. Because who knows? You could always come up and design something that is insanely unique and that even other games use. So I think that's fantastic. That's really, really awesome.
I appreciate it. It's a tough balance too because you can envision a scenario where a game designer has a cool
Mhm.
idea and he gets super inspired by it and then they start designing it. Then he realizes like, oh, this has already been done before and like maybe gets discouraged or maybe like their thing just looks exactly like this other thing. So it's just like not a good situation you want to be in. But at the same time, you could have someone that is playing so many other games that maybe they just make something that's like too much like something else, where it's not really bringing anything new to the
Mhm.
table. So for me, it's like I think obviously it's very important that people have fun, and it depends on like what you're trying to do as a creator. Like, are you trying to like have that be just something that you're trying to have fun with and that it's just like your passion, or are you trying to like have that be your
Mhm.
career? Because there might be a little bit different decisions to make there. And yeah, it's kind of a tough balance. But with Black Paper Moon, circling back to that, it was very interesting to dive into that one because I had already worked on Otherworlds
Mhm.
for my entire adult life, and basically it's just been like there's been so much involved with that game that I needed Black Paper Moon to be something different than Otherworlds, but also be uniquely me and just sort of like have advantages in ways that Otherworlds doesn't have. So like Otherworlds is a bit more like medium crunch where, it's like a lot of things there for like making your character and
Mhm.
having a lot of systems for like customizing them and stuff.
Mhm.
And so it's a bit more to like dive into, which some people prefer. But I wanted Black Paper Moon to be very rules light, like easy to jump into. You can make a character in 5 minutes. Like it's just very like simple,
Mhm.
and but it doesn't mean that takes away from the fun of it.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
yeah,
Rules
so
like games
so a lot
are
of
great.
times, yeah, yeah. So when I make a game, I want to try to like have it be sort of like a different angle that I haven't really tackled before.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think this is the perfect segue to start talking about Black Paper Moon. What inspired Black Paper Moon for you? I would love to hear what the inspiration is to get an idea of what this game that we're going to be talking about is going to be about.
Yeah. So part about the whole like fresh perspective thing is a lot of times I'm not really. I take my inspirations from like outside of the tabletop gaming industry,
Mhm.
and so with Black Paper Moon, a lot of people I don't think know this actually, but it started off with a different name. It was called A Bittersweet Trick or Treat,
Oh, that's
and
fun.
I yeah, and I designed that. I think it was like 2016, and I was actually inspired by us doing Summerween, which we'll get into later. But essentially, it's like celebrating Halloween in summer,
Mhm.
and that came from a show called Gravity Falls, which is an amazing show that my wife showed me. And they essentially they have an episode entitled Summerween, and so me and my friends started celebrating Summerween, and we'd get together, we'd host events, we'd do live streams, all this stuff. And I wanted us to be able to just have a fun, sort of like easy to play tabletop RPG, just a quick one shot that we could jump into.
Mhm.
And it's something where we've done other worlds in the past where we just sort of So like, okay, this is like a spooky version of Otherworlds, and we have our characters and stuff. But I was like, you know what? I think I could really dive into the more like Halloween aspects of this. I can really like make it a lot easier to just make your character on the fly. And so
Mhm.
it really was born out of the need for me to have something to like play for Summerween, essentially. So that's where it came from. And we basically I released the rules for that on in 2016, but it was sort of you became like one of my newsletter subscribers. You get access to something called the Vault, which has a bunch of like free PDFs for you, and then one of the PDFs is for a bittersweet trick or treat. But it didn't really catch much attention or traffic because I wasn't heavily promoting it. I didn't really have like art assets for it. I didn't really, it just really wasn't like a focus of anything. It was just something I kind of did for fun and then put it there for people that wanted it. It also was very, very light on the rules, and there's a lot
Mhm.
questions people had to where they just kind of needed more substance to it, even for a rules light game. So fast forward to last year, I was mapping out sort of like what projects I planned on tackling and what I wanted to release and work on. And Halloween and spooky stuff, that's always kind of like at least adjacent to like what Vindicated does. Like a lot of us are just
Mhm.
really big fans of that. I was born close to Halloween. My wife loves Halloween. Our friends love it. So it's something that we like to tackle, especially because all of our games are very like fantasy oriented. So it feels
Mhm.
very natural to just be like, okay, this is fantasy with some Halloween mixed in. So, so yeah, I was mapping out things, and then I was thinking, okay, I actually had a whole other project planned for last year. But as soon as I sort of like put it out a bit, I tested the waters. The interest seemed very low. Like it seemed like people just were not really vibing like with what I put out in general. Like people like seemed okay on it, but the response was like more lukewarm than I'd planned. And I think this is a lesson for any like creators that are trying to like handle this as a business is like sort of like testing the waters of things before you just dive completely in. And so when I tested the waters for this other project, I was like, okay, this doesn't seem to really have the legs I wanted it to have. So I sort of like almost like very fastly just switched it to a bittersweet trick or treat, where that was like a decision I made like on the fly based off of that.
Mhm.
And I only had like 1 month to promote a bittersweet trick or treat and
Oh
to set
God.
up the Kickstarter. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I completely switched out the entire Kickstarter, my whole project, my whole focus just within a month, like
Oh
before.
wow.
Yeah, yeah. And so that was kind of a fun time for me. And I lined up like 11 different podcasts and shows to be on and stuff, and like articles and all. Like it was I basically did like a whole like press tour for it, which was like the first time I ever did that, and that was kind of wild. But yeah, I switched it to a bittersweet trick or treat, and then I was running some play tests with my friends just to sort of get my head to be like refamiliarized with it because it had been a while since I played. Prior, we just played once every summer for Summerween, so I'd only played it a
Mhm.
little bit here and there, and I've ran a few other times, but in general, it'd been a little while. And so I was testing it out with friends, running through with other people. And then I just came up with the idea of like, well, what if I rename this to Black Paper Moon? Because I didn't necessarily want it to be something, a bittersweet trick or treat. People might think they could only play it or they should only play it for Halloween. But I was thinking like, well, maybe Black
Mhm.
Paper Moon sort of like opens it up a bit where it has like the Halloween flair so people could play it for Halloween, but you could play it for Summerween or whatever other time of year you want to. And I was
Whenever you
yeah,
want to be
whenever you
spooky.
feel like being spooky. And technically, you could still do that with a bittersweet trick or treat. But I did some testing on the name. I basically asked a bunch of people. I did some that was anonymous, some that weren't, and was just like, how do you feel about both these names? And Black Paper Moon just really scored higher in general. So I just sort of
Mhm.
made the decision to change that probably like a week or two before we went live. And we got a logo for it, and we basically sort of like rebranded it, and it sort of became its own game at that point.
Mhm.
Like we still have a bittersweet trick or treat, but Black Paper Moon is like the leveled up, like the like the next level and just the better version. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah,
That sounds insane.
yeah.
To do that whole switch and have only a month. That I mean, I just congratulations on like, just going through all that because that sounds insanely stressful.
Well, I will say this. Funny enough, even though I know that sounds very stressful, and I'm surprised to say this, but it actually wasn't that stressful. Like
Oh, really?
I don't really know why. Things just things came pretty naturally for it. I felt comfortable with the game.
Hmm.
It seemed like people really grabbed a hold of like what the game was. We had the biggest like pre-launch signups that we've ever had for any game that we launched on Kickstarter. So yeah, there's
Congrats.
a lot of yeah, thank you. So we had a lot of hype built for it. And overall, it's been one of the more surprising Kickstarters and just projects I've done. For comparison, I just ran an Otherworlds campaign, and technically the Otherworlds one made more money than the Black Paper Moon one. However, I'm more surprised by Black Paper Moon's Kickstarter because Otherworlds has the legacy of 13 years and like a lot of stuff I've worked on. And I think part of what made that one do well is that there's people that I had ran a game of Otherworlds for like 7 years ago that have been waiting for a physical core rulebook for it, and now they can finally
Hmm.
get it. So there's just so much more kind of added to that history of Otherworlds that really I think helped pushed it to get a higher funding. But for Black Paper Moon, for it to be kind of like thrown together in that 1 month, even though I had a history of like, the rules and making it, just for me to sort of put that campaign together in a month and start promoting it in that short amount of time, I'm very pleased and happy with it. And we have more sales for Black Paper Moon on our website than any other game. So there's
Hmm.
definitely a lot of excitement for it.
Yeah, it seems like such an interesting game. And I mean, I want to know more. So, what is the basic premise of Black Paper Moon? Like, what kind of stories are you playing in this game?
Yeah, so of course people can sort of make up their own, but the main story that it sort of lays out for you is essentially, for one reason or another, you attend one of various academies. The main one being Umbrewood Academy. You could sort of think of it as like Hogwarts for Harry Potter. And essentially at Umbrewood Academy, you go there to train to be a hunter. And as a hunter, you hunt like evil monsters, darkness, all that stuff. And as a hunter, you specialize in a certain power that's specific to you and a certain type of weapon that you want to specialize in. And these can be any power set or any weapon that you can think of, essentially. So you can be someone who has like a broadsword that turns into a shotgun,
Fun.
and your power is that you can manipulate fire. And so you go out hunting, demons or witches or whatever like that. But Umberwood also has their own fair share of monsters as well that likes to be a part of that, because it's like, well, there's like bad monsters, but there's also like a Frankenstein guy that's one of the main like NPCs, or like a pre-made character that you can jump in as, and he can control lightning and he's super strong and he has like high endurance and stuff. And then we also have Mary, who is nicknamed Bloody Mary, and she is sort of like the most popular character that we have in Black Paper Moon. And her whole like lore is that she died 100 years ago and then just now came back, and she doesn't know why. And some people tell her that it was basically her parents' fault, but even though she can't really remember everything, she's like, I don't think that was it. There's like an element to the game where everyone's encouraged to have a mystery that they're trying to solve, to sort of like fit in with the theme. And so like her mystery is like trying to solve like what actually happened to her and why she passed away. So it's like people can jump into the game playing as these characters that are already written, and get a feel for how the mechanics are with those characters. And then you can definitely make your own and become your own hunter, your own weapon, your own powers, and just really have a good time for there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that sounds really, really fun. And I know we talked a bit before, but and you mentioned having some inspiration from Soul Eater for
Yeah,
this game. And I
that's
can very much tell, which is awesome, by the way. I think that is so fun.
yeah. Well, what's funny is that because it started off as a bittersweet trick or treat and inspired by Summerween and stuff, it didn't necessarily start off at all being inspired by Soul Eater. I mean, Soul Eater in some ways I feel like was an inspiration because I just really love that anime. It's one of my favorite anime of all time. So I think it's always going to sort of be there as an inspiration, but it definitely wasn't at the forefront of my mind as much as what people would probably think with the title Black Paper Moon and having it be the way it currently is. Uh, but whenever I made Black Paper Moon, another like inspiration is I really love the setup for Ruby. It's like this sort of science fantasy world, and they have hunters and huntresses, and they have like these weird, cool weapons, and then they Hunt Grimm and stuff. So like there's a lot of inspiration for that, a little inspiration from Harry Potter, So there's a lot mixed in there. As far as Soul Eater goes, I noticed though that a lot of people are like really itching for like that Soul Eater experience. And it's like, okay, well, it's cool that I have something now that's like Black Paper Moon, people can jump into it and have that. And while you can still replicate a lot of Soul Eater from Black Paper Moon, I'm looking at releasing what I'm calling the Soul Punk edition, which will be basically additional content added to Black Paper Moon that will essentially cover some more like Soul Eater inspired mechanics, namely having the ability for like a certain character's main focus would be transforming into a weapon, and then like having the dynamics of being able to play with one person being like the wielder, the other person being the weapon, and then balancing that, and then even having something that's akin to soul resonance, but it won't be called that, but it'd be similar to that through like spirit linking. And so people that really want that, stay tuned to the end of this year. We plan on doing something with that closer to fall. People can see that we'll be releasing the Soul Punk edition for Black Paper Moon.
That's super exciting. I think that is a fantastic direction to go into, because I one of my favorite animes is Noragami, and it's not exactly like that, but it's got the element of one person being a weapon and the other person wielding them and having like powers and things like that. So even though like Soul Eater isn't the first thing I'm thinking of, I think that would be a really fun system to try and recreate that kind of story in. So I think that's really, really neat. And if you guys think this game sounds awesome, please look out for the, Soul Punk expansion to come out, because that's amazing. So
and this podcast is my first time, I think, publicly saying that. So if you're hearing it here, this is the first time you're hearing it.
Yay! That's awesome. Well, I'm very honored to be the first one to get this information.
You're very welcome. And as for Noragami, that's one of my wife's favorite shows, and I've seen season 1. I do like it. I still need to see season 2. But yeah, it's I need to probably rewatch it so I can sort of see if there's any elements I can sort of be inspired by to maybe incorporate in the Soul Punk edition.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely recommend it, even just for ideas. It would definitely help, because it's sort of that same vein. Plus, the anime's good, but the manga's much better.
I heard the manga. Well, doesn't the anime? And I know people listening. We're not going to stay too off topic for too long. But doesn't the anime doesn't finish right? Like it doesn't. It needs more, right? That's the thing.
Yeah, it's only like 2 seasons, I believe, and then it like ends, and there hasn't been anything else. So it's like no. But so to actually get more of the story, the manga, but the anime is good on its own. Even just like the first season's very, very good.
All right, good to hear.
So not talking about anime. So with Black Paper Moon, I'm very curious of the steps of character creation, since it seems like the characters are really interesting in this game with having like both the weapons and the powers, and I'd like to go through the steps of that.
Yeah, so it'd probably help if I just had this next to me, but I didn't think to do
that. You can get it out. That is all good.
yeah. So I'm about to do that real quick, because as I was telling her before starting this podcast, I just finished the Other Worlds Kickstarter. We have another RPG that's coming out not too much longer. So my head's been kind of in those for the time being, and then when it comes to fall, I'm going to be like diving right back into Black Paper Moon. And and doing that lightly in the background for the Soul Punk edition and stuff, but it's essentially like where I'm at. But yeah, like I said, you can make the character very quickly. Hold on, I'm still pulling it up here. Okay,
all good.
Yeah. So essentially, people know Vindicated for using exclusively 6-sided dice systems. I'm not sure if it will always be that way, but I think the 6-sided dice will always be the focus, even if we branch into some other dice along the way. It's not because I hate other dice; I like all dice. But there was something that felt very natural for me using D6s, because as a kid, that's all I had, and that was, my dad. I don't know. There are other dice that I could have gotten, I'm sure, but it was just very easy where like everything came with a 6-sided dice. If you got any type of board game, if it was like a very basic one, it probably had some 6-sided dice to it. So it was just very
accessible.
It's very accessible, just easy. And so it feels like it sort of has like a charming quality to it that I really enjoy. And I just, since I made a lot of games as a kid. It just reminds me of that time of being a kid and being very imaginative. And it also is like a reminder to like not overcomplicate things. I also
Mhm.
don't like the idea of saying like, okay, well, you use D8s and use D10s, and people are like getting which type of dice they're using, and they're getting confused about which dice is which and which one has what many
Mhm.
sides. And then they're like, and I feel like it just distracts from the game when it gets to that point, because it's like, well, the main point isn't searching for the right dice. It's like rolling the dice, seeing what happens, and going on with the story. So it's just meant to
Mhm.
be very streamlined and just very fun to jump into when it comes to that. So
Yeah,
Black Paper
absolutely.
Moon, yeah, Black Paper Moon's no exception to that. It's strictly D6s, and essentially, if you roll anything without being proficient in it, you roll 1d6, and if you're proficient with it, or you can convince the world master, which is our version of a game master,
Mm.
the world master, if you are proficient with it, then you roll 2 dice. So, for example, when you make your character, you give them a name, you give them a weapon that you want to be good with. So, for example, if you want to be like Jake Podakim, the Pumpkin Prince, you can say that he's very good with the rapier. He's kind of like a noble. He likes fencing. So that's like the weapon
Mhm.
that he's good with. And you can choose whatever weapon you want. It can be as wild as you can think of. But, that will be his weapon. So as long as he's using that weapon, he gets 2 6-sided dice. And if he's not
Mhm.
using that weapon, he gets 1. So if there's any moment where he gets disarmed and he has to try to scrap with his fists, or he picks up a chair, then he gets the 1d6 instead of 2d6. So playing the
Absolutely.
game, yeah, you want to always try to get the 2d6. Essentially, is where you're at, because you're going to be at a big disadvantage if you don't have that. And
Mhm.
then say for your power, you can pick any power you want out. There's a list of different ones you can choose from, and to give you ideas. There's even a random generation table, so you can sort of like randomly generate like what type of power your character has, or what type of character you're even playing. But if you wanted to
Mhm.
choose one, you could go with say like plant control, which is like what he has. So anything involving plants, you get to do 2 dice on, and you basically could to the world master saying like, okay, well, I have plant control, so it makes sense if I can, do this and that with a tree. I can like move the tree branches to try to like make a barricade.
Mhm.
And it's like, all right, cool. So you're gonna get 2 dice on that instead of the one. And then
Oh, that's fun. Yeah.
yeah, and so it's very open in that way. And then you also though have to add to it a drawback. So,
Mm.
for
Mhm.
example, Jake, he can't use his power whenever he's distracted or whenever he's being taunted. So,
Ooh, yeah.
yeah, and so he can be like thrown off by that very easily. And so, and some people's powers might be that they need a certain amount of time to sort of charge up their power, or they might
Mhm.
can only use it a certain amount of times. And it gives you a list of drawbacks as well that you can sort of use as reference, or you can make up your own. Then there's
I like that a
deviations.
lot.
Yeah, thank you. And then there's deviations, which is essentially like a characteristic trait that your character can like role play as, but it's meant to be something that doesn't necessarily always work to your favor. So, for example, with
Mhm.
Jake, he's like chivalrous to a fault. Maybe if he gets into like a fight with someone, he's like, "Oh, well, I can't hit a woman," and then he gets like hit or whatever. It's like he has like a certain just it's like, okay, well, maybe depending on the situation, you're kind of like naive in this way. Or for
Mhm. Yeah.
example, the Frankenstein, he's always about fighting first and asking questions later. So if you're trying to be
Mhm.
diplomatic with your team and he's on your team, he's just going to be like, fight first, ask questions while fighting. He just runs in and breaks through the wall and starts punching people. You're like, no, what are you doing? So everyone's deviation is meant to like add to the role playing experience and really just sort of enhance the story, but also make it so not everyone's just completely trying to just like game the system and always be like, okay, well,
Mhm.
there's not like I'm just gonna always use the thing I'm proficient with and always roll these 2 dice and always have things go my way. It's like no, there's drawbacks to your powers, there's deviations. Margaret, for example, her deviation is she's overly paranoid about things. So like that can
Mhm.
cause some issues as well. So
Yeah, I like that a lot. One of my favorite things in TTRPGs is failure or like drawbacks and like flaws and bad things for your character because I just think it makes playing so much more interesting and it's exactly what you said, like you're not always trying to game the system if you have negative things that's kind of built into it. You kind of have to deal with those and you can work with those while you're playing and make it more interesting. I love it. Love it so much.
it's yeah. Well, I'm happy to hear that because it's definitely there to make it more interesting. I completely agree with everything you said. And one of the inspirations for that really was an anime called Konosuba, which is a very hilarious anime in which everyone has a very they basically all have really good powers, but a
Mhm.
very serious drawback and deviation, essentially.
Mhm.
And so, like for example, there's a girl that is a wizard, and the only spell she knows is explosion, which is like a massive nuke.
Oh no.
But yeah, but that's all she can do. And once she does it, she passes out. Her body is just like completely like she just can't move at all. So
Mhm.
she's like incapacitated. And she just thinks like explosions solve everything. So she'll just be like, I know how to take care of this. Explode and just explode it. But then then they have to like carry her body. And they're like, why'd you do that? Like we didn't need to blow that up. And so like that's hers. And like another person is like they are like a knight and they can defend and like take damage and
Mhm.
stuff. Their problem is like they enjoy like being hurt. So like they just like they'll just stand there getting beat up, like even to the point where like they shouldn't be there any longer.
Mhm.
And I don't know, there's a lot of weird stuff that goes on in it, but it's like very very fun, and it was definitely like an inspiration for that.
Yeah, I
So I'm
can.
glad that you enjoy that.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. Again, I just think it makes it so much more interesting. It's again, like I said, flaws are one of my favorite thing. So, and I
Yeah.
especially with the whole deviation thing adds those interesting moments in role play specifically because I think that's sort of what D&D is commonly a touchstone on here. I feel like that's sort of what D&D tried to do with like the background things in 5th edition. I don't know if they're in previous editions, but adding in flaws and personality traits and ideals and bonds and stuff like that to help kind of role play your character. I specifically think this I wouldn't say does it better because it's dependent on different people, but I like it just kind of staying to one thing, one deviation that you can just very strongly use throughout the game versus trying to consider many different things.
Well, I appreciate that. And it depends on the game and like what you're looking for, what you're
Mhm.
trying to do. And just for this experience in particular, I knew exactly like what the sort of theme was going to be. And so I think it really works for this.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I can't remember if I mentioned this off the podcast or on the podcast, but we also have mysteries as well, where every character is encouraged to have their own mystery
Oh
that they're
yeah.
trying to solve. Yeah, so you basically will have like a broad narrative for like whatever you're trying to work through, that might be like your main goal for your team and your squad,
Mhm.
but each individual person will have their own mysteries that they're also trying to uncover as well as throughout the game.
Yeah, I think that is fantastic. And I'm curious, you mentioned using this a lot with one-shot games. How well do you think it would run a longer campaign style game?
Yeah, so I definitely that was something that came up whenever I had the Kickstarter up. I noticed
Mhm.
that there are people that were like, "Hey, I like this a lot. Is there a way we can make this more of a campaign based game?" And I'd say yes, and I definitely tried to incorporate mechanics to help with that. It
Mhm.
definitely came from the background of being more of a one-shot focus type game.
Mhm.
However, I ended up adding ways that you can level up. So for example, like you have your power, but you're meant to start your power off at sort of like a base form. And then there's like ways you can level that power up so it becomes stronger.
Mhm.
So, for example, if you are playing a witch style character, instead of saying that you can just do witchy things, you'd say, like, okay, well, I am good at scrying. So I can like see a bit into the future in this way. And it's like,
Mhm.
okay, well, as you level up, maybe then you get the ability to fly. So then you can fly on a broomstick, or
Oh
then maybe
yeah.
you can cast some sort of like arcane bolts of energy or whatever. And then so you can start adding to your toolbox at what you can do as you level up.
Oh, I like that a lot. That's a fun way to level up. And it keeps it broad as well, like, nothing's set in stone, which makes it so that the possibilities are endless. Whatever, would fit in that moment when you level up, things like that, you can just go with it because it's open to what you would like to do based off of that character. That's
Yeah,
cool.
and I appreciate that. And there's some times where some people need to sort of like know where the limits are and like what counts as like too far or this or that.
Hmm.
So I try to incorporate that in the game as well. So it gives you ideas, there's examples, there's also things it's like, okay, this is probably how you should do it, or like here's a way you could do it, or like what to consider. Because I know it can help having that guiding hand to like make sure it's like when things are kind of like really broad or like loosey goosey. Like some people
Hmm.
like really need that helping hand. So I definitely tried to add elements of that to really help cover those bases for that as well.
Fantastic. I love that a lot. How are like, you mentioned adding in those extra things for, the stability and to make sure that everyone has an idea of what's going on. It gives good reference tools of, what would be too strong, what would, guidance on that. How is the reference tools in your game? Do you have any like specific ones, such as like PDFs that people can use that kind of explain how the game, that gives like the basic rules of the game? How are the like tools of reference within the book to make running the game easier for both the GM and also the playing the game easier on the player's part? How are those tools?
Yeah, so currently Black Paper Moon is still, it's my newest RPG that I've released. So as far as like background resources outside the game itself, there's not too much at the moment. We have different videos sort of explaining the game and like running through it. And I definitely try very hard to make sure that if there's any like questions that come up a lot, that those things are answered. Now, luckily, before the game was published, I went through a lot of, like I asked a lot of people that were very casual gamers and people that have a lot of experience with tabletop RPGs. I got feedbacks from both groups, and I was just really taking like what they had to say, the questions that they had, and I really used a lot of that to help massage like what this ended up being. So I feel like the core rules is a very good like strong foundation for people to learn the game and to understand it because of that. Because like some of the people like that I asked like is Mildred the Monk, who is like credited, and he's like interviewed like probably hundreds of different tabletop RPG designers and some other content creators that's worked with other RPG designers as well as casual gamers. So I really got their feedback and the questions that they had, I made sure were already like answered in the book, if that helps answer your question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is fantastic. I always think there is just because you have a rules light game doesn't mean that you can't have a good amount of information in that game to make it easier to run. So I appreciate, just from my point of view, people putting in the extra time to answer those questions in the book, make it clear, make it easier to play, make it easier to run, because that's just going to improve the overall experience. So I think that is fantastic that you have been able to do that.
Yeah, I definitely try. It's a hard balance because sometimes if you're like, oh, here's a rules light book, and I'm afraid that if a casual person sees it, maybe they'd see like that doesn't seem rules light. There's like so many pages or this or that. It's like too like just like information overload. I feel like can be a problem for tabletop RPGs just when people see it. They're like, oh, this book has 300 pages. It's like, how am I supposed to learn that? It's very scary for people. But at the same time, yeah, if it's just like such little information and people have all these questions, it's like, well, that's not good either. So it's tough. I do need to bring up something unique about Black Paper Moon, though, that our listeners should know that I might not be
Oh yeah,
aware of. There's a unique mechanic in the game that's called the die tower, which is literally a tower made of dice. And basically, as you fail challenges throughout the game, you start stacking dice onto the die tower. And if the die tower falls over, that's when something really bad happens, which could be like character like really failing or maybe dying if it's a one shot or whatever you want to have.
Oh no.
Yeah, it can be really bad. So that's like when the things take like a drastic shift. And so you're trying to like keep the tower from falling over. Now there
And
is,
you add to that every time you fail?
yeah, every time someone fails, they add to the die tower.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So, but of course, if you guys like rest, if you guys like pick up at another session, it resets the tower. So there's ways, there's ways to like bring the tower down. It's not like it will just stay up no matter what. But that is like one of the main crux things for the game, and sort of like a lot of like one of the main mechanics that like have got people talking about it. There is a variant though where if you're playing online or if you're playing with people that aren't comfortable using a die tower, there is a death roll mechanic where instead it adds to like a dice pool. And it essentially sort of like replicates the same sort of idea as the die tower without using the die tower.
Oh, that's great. I love the consideration of even just online, because as someone who has unfortunately just played online for the last like year or more, there are games that have like these really cool mechanics that I can't always use because it is online, don't always use cameras, stuff like that. You just can't do it very well. I like that you put that into consideration for the game. That's great.
Definitely try. There's a lot to consider when it comes to making a game, and it's always one of those things where you feel you feel bad if you make a game, you're happy with it, and then you consider all these things, and then someone's like, yeah, but did you add this or did you consider this? And you're like, oh, how did I miss that? Oh no.
Can't always
Reminds
make
me.
everyone happy, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, it reminds me of like even something as big as Star Wars. I know when The Force Awakens came out, there's the I won't even though it's been out for a while. There's like a main character that dies. So this will be light spoilers because you'll probably figure out who I'm talking about. But there's a character that dies, and they're basically associated with Chewbacca in some way.
Mhm.
And basically at the end, Leia gives like the different characters hugs over this loss, and they're like, "Oh, this is a bad thing," but no one consoles Chewbacca, and it's like when J.J. Abrams had that brought up, he was like, "I just completely forgot," and like no one told him or anything. So it was just
Mhm.
like a complete like just completely missed that. And it's like I don't. It's crazy that for something as big as Star Wars that happens. It's like, well, I don't want to miss that, but I don't know. That's a whole nother topic, I guess.
I mean, you always have, I mean, that is why community feedback is so important. You know, seeing what people are wanting from a game or being able to point out those, not necessarily mistakes, but things that might be overlooked. And again, you won't always make everyone happy because I think people will always want something more or less from a game depending on their own preferences. But I like that you at least keep it in consideration for the games that you run, doing the play testing and stuff like that.
I think that's actually a great way to put it. Is that like I think getting feedback as a creator is incredibly important,
Hmm.
and just because you hear something doesn't mean you necessarily need to change it.
Hmm.
Because if you took everyone's opinions, especially if you got a lot of them, you might end up with a game that just doesn't make any sense. It's just kind of like it's just all over the place. But like when it came to the idea of like having a variant where you didn't need the die tower, it's like okay, well that concern makes sense because as you said, there's a lot of people that play just online, or maybe they have to play online, maybe they can't meet up with their play group. There's a lot of factors that go into a reason why someone might not be able to or want to use the die tower. So it's like okay, well this one makes sense to add.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great. And actually, I am curious if you have any stories from playing Black Paper Moon related to the dice tower and it falling, because that's just the only thing running through my head right now. I'm like, I'm curious if anything has happened, anything like really bad.
Well, I added a mechanic to the game as well, where if you manage to pull off 13 dice onto the die tower, not only do you get to reset the tower, but a miracle happens, so it can like bring
Oh
someone
wow.
back, where it's like, oh, they're not actually dead; they start breathing again, and like this person that you thought died this encounter, like they're still alive, like they're
Mhm.
saved, or like someone gets like just like all the like anime inspiration they need to like take down the bad guy with like one giant last hit or something, like a spirit bomb or whatever. So like that can happen, but it's very very difficult to have happen. So most of the best moments of the die tower is when the 13th dice is being placed and
Mhm.
seeing if the miracle is about to happen or if it falls over, and then like that character just gets like wiped out and just dies or something because it feels like it's like all or nothing, and it's
Mhm.
it's also very fun for the game because there's a very interesting like dichotomy between it being super silly, fun, goofy, everyone having these deviations. It has this like Halloween vibe to it, and just everyone's having a good time. But then as the tower slowly like creeps up, people start to feel very tense in that moment, and everyone gets quiet, and everyone's just like, no one touch the table, no one do this, and just everyone's very like even to the point where I've seen a lot of playtesters that pull out their phones and like start filming like the die tower once it gets up, and like just knowing like just like having a game that like naturally encourages people to pull out their phone and start filming it is pretty
Mhm.
cool for a tabletop RPG because that's something that I don't know that happens often. As far as a specific time, I don't know that there's a specific one that comes to mind because I've ran through so many like instances that I think more about like that general feeling of just seeing people pull out their phones, filming it,
Mhm.
people feeling tense, trying to get that 13th dice and stuff. And they all like are really really fun and funny. That I know it's kind of a disappointing answer, but there's not like one specific time that just seemed to be like heads and shoulders better than the other ones. But I think the non-disappointing perspective of that is that they're all so good that it's like they all I just am reminded and smile about all those moments, and they're all good. So it's nice that that same type of moment is replicated so often, as opposed to it only being achieved one time, and that's like the one time I fall back on to talk about, and then all the other times are like lackluster.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is a great answer, that there has been so many times that have just been that good. That absolutely fantastic. Actually, how many times have you play tested slash run this game even yourself? Because it seems like you've played quite a bit, and I think that's really cool.
Yeah. Well, I'll say too. I mean, it's like that moment I think has happened to every single game I've seen happen, and every game that
Mhm.
I've heard like people play. Even to the point where when I was still fleshing out the rules, we had one playtesting group. They said that they weren't in love with the game at the time because there were a few elements that they think that they wanted added, and I listened to their criticism on it, and I added everything that they said because I thought that they actually gave really good criticism, and it was like they could see that they liked the basics of it, but they just wanted a little bit more from it. So I really took that to heart. I added all the extra stuff, but even with them kind of walking away with sort of like a lackluster impression, even they filmed the die tower, and even they said that they loved that moment so much that like they would still consider getting the game just because they love how it played into that, even thinking that the other parts were lackluster. So and thankfully they told me that before I finished the game. So like the version that people currently have, it has the suggestions that they recommended I add and stuff like that. But
That's
even
great.
even to their point where like they seem to have more of a middling response, they still were very like hyped and excited about the die tower.
Oh, that's so cool. Makes me want to play in person.
I know. I wish I could. It would be fun. I mean, maybe. So I haven't used a lot of like tabletop simulator, but maybe they have it where you can like try to, like stack the dice on there. Like maybe it's like with the way the physics are. Maybe it would be about the same. Or
Yeah, that would actually be really fun to try.
yeah, or maybe I just need to try to like hire someone to do like a fun like Black Paper Moon app, where you can literally like build the tower in the app, and then like where all the players can see it on the computer and stuff.
Mhm. That would be really fun to try. That would be awesome. Because again, that is the one unfortunate thing with playing online, it's like those specific moments. That's why 10 Candles always kills me. I want to play that game so bad, but I know you need that dark environment with the candles there and everyone being there, that it's like, one day.
It's funny that you brought that up because I literally only just learned about Ten Candles like an hour before I recorded this.
Oh, it's such a good game. It's such a good game. I did an episode on it, and I may be a little biased, but I think it's a fantastic episode. It's an amazing game. It's such an experience. I love it so
It
much.
seemed pretty cool, but I know that you asked me how many times I playtest this, and I kind of went on a tangent. Uh, um,
All
Yeah,
good.
to be honest, I don't it's not something that I ever count. Like I said, I did make
Mhm,
the basics of the rules back in, I believe it's 2016, or maybe it was 2015. I'm pretty sure it's 2016 though. So, it'd been like 6 years, and I had played it for Summerween. I had ran it with my family because we'd have like a Halloween party, and I'd run it for them. I sent the game out to a bunch of different playtest groups, and
mhm,
I'm not sure exactly how many times that they played it. I've ran it at conventions before. I don't have a definite number, but I will say I feel a lot better about. It feels a lot easier to playtest more of a rules light game than something that is more of a medium style game,
mhm,
something closer to like D&D or something. I've realized I don't think I'll do another game at that level of rules
mhm,
unless I just have a massive team, or like a lot, like a large network of people I can have playtesting and stuff. Because with other worlds, for example, it's like I used to run gaming events at a card shop, and then I would make Facebook events for it. And I had done like over 500 of those, and every single one of those was a
mhm,
4 hour plus session. And I also ran it for tons of conventions, and so that game I've ran over 1,000 times easily. And
mhm,
that one just has so much to it, though, that it still feels like it's like scratching the surface, and in some ways.
mhm.
But with Black Paper Moon,
Didn't quite get the full
yeah.
experience.
So with Black Paper Moon, I definitely haven't playtested as much as other worlds because I haven't had like a decade plus of time to work with it. But I actually feel kind of more comfortable with Black Paper Moon's rules in terms of like where it's at, and just like it feels very natural to me, like just where things are, and
Mhm.
like there's just like a certain level where as long as people are playing it, having a good time, their questions are answered, like already in the book and stuff. I just feel like at that point, like you're ready to release the game. I feel like some people, as an artist of sorts, you can be stuck at like the last, 5%, 2%, and then you want that to just be perfect, but you're spending hours trying to like figure that out, and sometimes you're going back and forth, and at
Mhm.
that point, I think it's just much more helpful to sort of put it out there and then see, where people sort of line up on it. But yeah, I'm happy with Black Paper Moon's rules, and I'm happy that other people are.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is fantastic, and I already got it up on my phone and stuff. To buy Black Paper Moon, I'm like, I am going to get this at some point when I can, because I think, you know, just from what you've been saying about it, I can feel the love for the game, and it makes me want to play it even more. So I'm definitely going to be checking it out myself, just so that you know.
I
Um,
appreciate it.
but I'm curious. So, I mean, you mentioned not wanting to make something that's got more medium set rules. Has Black Paper Moon kind of brought you over to the dark side of rules like games?
In some ways, I'd say so. I mean, this is a tough question to answer. So I kind of view it like food. Like I really enjoy a nice steak. But
Mhm.
it's kind of like a time and place. It's kind of expensive. You don't always want to buy a steak. So sometimes chicken fingers are like where it's at. And I love I love me some chicken fingers. So maybe it's kind of like that where I wouldn't put chicken or steak like over the other as a whole, because like chicken I can
Mhm.
just have like more readily available. It's like a lot more flexible in that way. It's more convenient. So it's kind of like
Mhm.
rules light games, and then like with the more medium games, it's like you got a steak. So uh, maybe that works for people.
Yeah, I think actually that's a great analogy for it, because I feel the same way. There is definitely a time and place for crunchier games. I can still respect and want to play slightly more crunchy games, but when it's like almost, it's the convenience. It's like if I'm going to run something, might as well run something that's going to be easier and everyone's going to have an easy time learning and getting a hang of in one session versus taking, several sessions to even get to know how to like play your character and then get into the mechanics and all of that. There's time and place for both, but I think that's a great
Okay,
answer
awesome. I'm
actually.
happy to hear that because I had never thought of that, and I never answered that question, especially in that way. So I'm glad that that worked. I think though, like Vindicated as a whole, we do tend to lean a bit on things that are a bit more on the simpler side, easier to understand, and I think for that reason, I have a lot of my friends are very casual. They kind of see me as like the board game guy or the tabletop guy, and because I have more of a collection than they do, and they just sort of like play at like a very casual level, but it makes it so I can make sure that my games are very accessible to them and that they enjoy it. So I think that's a big reason why they lean that way. Also because being like a small team where it's like only me as the game designer, it's I
Mhm.
think it's just too. It's almost like asking too much work to try to make like a big box board game or like a bunch of like very big tabletop RPGs, because it's like really to have it at a good level. I just feel like it just takes too much work where you really need to be able to like have like a big team that's probably all like salary paid, that they can dedicate their time to like making
Mhm.
sure that this game's like where it needs to be, because like with Other Worlds, for example, like I said, that's it's been 13 years since I released the initial rule system for that, and I don't have like another 13 years I can just dedicate to like a game like that, or at least I
Mhm.
mean, especially like for even just from like a company perspective, like I need to make games and get it out there. So if I said, okay, well, Vindicated, we're hoping to do a good job. We're gonna like release our next game in 13 years. It's like, well, that's not, like I don't have like funding or anything at that point. So there's like I'm not able to like really create anything. So it's really tough. So I think
Mhm.
I don't know, and I think just the way the world is and stuff at the moment, it's easier. It's already a challenge to sort of get people to the table, which I already think is like an amazing experience, and I
Mhm.
love sitting around the table with friends. So I think just having a lighter game, a game that people like anyone can understand, it's like you don't need that to be a barrier if it doesn't have to be, you know. So like going with a rules light game, I think works out really well.
Exactly. For sure. I completely agree. And I must say I've been recently running like Monday games for a group of friends where we essentially get together every Monday and we play a game. And we've gone through a few so far and it's all been just really easy rules like games and I'm 100% planning on running this for them now cuz there is just that charm about just being able to pick something up and play it that day. And those are definitely my favorite types of games. Plus, I must say, also rules like games. And you can have this with a crunchier game, but the looser it is when it comes to things that you can do, like it doesn't like with D&D actions, it's very, you have to do these types of things. You can decide to like grab a rope and tie it around someone, sure, but usually people are going to default to attacking or grappling or whatever the action is. I love the freedom within rules light systems to where it feels like you can do anything because the rules aren't in place to make you feel limited. And so I just love that a lot. And I see a lot of potential, even just, again, what you have said so far of those chances with Black Paper Moon that I'm very excited about.
Awesome. I'm definitely happy to hear it.
Yeah, no, I'm super. There are just some games that click very well, especially for the group that I have. And I had one actually a few episodes, I think maybe last episode. I don't know, actually. I don't know what order these are coming out in. But I had one just a little bit ago that was that exact same experience where it's like, that is something that's, rules light, just the concept of the game, all of this is going to fit my group. I'm feeling the same exact way towards Black Paper Moon. Like just the way, because we're all anime fans. We like that type of media, those types of tropes, stuff like that. And then bringing that into a simplified TTRPG that everyone loves. Absolutely. So this is 100% getting ready for my group.
Awesome. Well, I'm happy too because when I first started making games, I heard a lot of pushback, honestly, in the industry that was very much like, "Oh, I might would look at this more if it didn't have that art style, or if it wasn't like anime inspired, or like, oh, you like anime." Like, there's a lot of like I remember being at conventions, and I think this would have been, let's see, I think this would have been maybe like 2014. So maybe like 10, almost 10 years ago. There was a huge. I had a lot of people kind of like look at me with disgust, almost just like seeing that I was like coming from like more of an anime perspective. With that being like the aesthetic I was going for and the inspirations coming from anime. And one thing though that I've been happy about is, there's sort of I'm trying to think of how to word this, but essentially, whether those people like it or not, anime is becoming more and more popular. And so even if people didn't want to accept it at first with like what I was doing, it is becoming more and more natural for people to basically like the style I'm going for. And so even though it was very difficult for me in the beginning, because a lot of people that were sort of like in our industry that are a bit higher up and stuff, a lot of times for business, they say it's about who you know, and unfortunately the people I knew, they didn't like me because I liked anime. Like that's how it felt. It was like very much like, oh well, if you were going for more of that like normal looking art style instead of the anime aesthetic, then we might would work with you, but since you're doing anime, we're not going to do anything with you. So to have it where like anime is becoming more accepted as like an art form and a style, and just having that be an inspiration, it's really nice, and I actually think it's going to help Vindicated the more years that pass. I think more and more people are getting into anime, and that when they get into tabletop games, they're going to be very happy to see like some of the stuff that we're making at Vindicated, and I'll be very happy to show them the games that we've made.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is amazing for you. I love that it's had that shift because I've definitely noticed it as well. I don't have as much experience in that world around that time, but I know that it's become more and more normal, I guess is the word, to like those types of things. So I love that it's going in that direction and that your point of view and that your style of games can get the recognition and actually be taken more serious
Yeah,
that
now
they actually like deserve.
yeah, yeah. Well, I appreciate that because and honestly, I'd kind of forgotten that this was even a thing. It just sort of came to mind as we are talking. But yeah, because now I think it's seen almost more as like a plus to some people where they're like, oh yeah, it has like the cool anime style, or yeah, this is inspired by
Mhm.
Soul Eater. I want to jump in, and it's seen more as
Exactly.
like, yeah, it's seen more as a positive thing. But definitely, I remember before it was just very, very tough to where it honestly made me like kind of withdraw from doing like tabletop conventions. Like I stopped doing
Mhm.
any like conventions that were centered around tabletop RPGs or board games or anything like that because the feedback I got was just really really bad or not bad. It wasn't like feedback that was bad. It was like just people wouldn't even talk to me. Like people would look at me weird and like
Mhm.
if we tried to like sell a game, they wouldn't want to buy it. And then when we went to anime conventions, like they would buy it up, like they would love it. It was like much more welcoming, like friendly, and so it was like this weird. I've been kind of stuck in this weird position where I have people telling me like, yeah, well, you need to take this to this tabletop convention, and I remember my history going to those. I'm just like, yeah, but the last time I went to that con, like no one wanted me there, you know. And whenever I go to
Mhm.
these anime conventions, like they really love what I'm doing, and they are like super excited. They want to get pictures with me, and they want to like post it all over their social media and have me sign their game. And then when I go to this other one, they're like, oh, well, you're not a real game designer, or you're not this or that, or you know. So it's just like I even had a guy at the time tell me that I was too young to make a good game. And granted, this was like 6 years ago. So, you know, I'm currently 30. I was like 24 at the time. He was like, well, like he picked up the game. He looked at it. He's like, oh, this looks really good. And then the friend I had beside me was like, yeah, he made it. Like he designed it. And he was like, oh, you designed it? And I was like, yeah, I designed it. And he was like, oh, well, there's no way this game's good then. And he just sets it down and walked away. And I was like, well, that's kind of that's kind of rude. And yeah, so I don't know.
Cool.
Yeah, and I just assumed that dealt with my age because I couldn't really think of any other thing that made any sense. But yeah, I
Mhm.
just dealt with a lot of weird stuff when it comes to that. And admittedly, I haven't tried to go back to a tabletop convention in a while, so I don't know. Maybe the sentiment would be different.
Yeah, it's very possible, but honestly, I think the anime conventions, if you do good there, I think that is a fantastic place for you to be. There's one big one that I've gone to a lot, and anime conventions are usually just one of the more friendly places to be. Everyone's so nice and very open just to see what people have. So I think that's great that you've kind of found your place within those conventions and that people actually look at your work and not just kind of dismiss it. Because the TTRPG community, I feel like, has changed a
I think it
lot.
has too, for sure.
And I guess, yeah, I don't have the most experience to, say things for certain, but it seems to be shifting towards something that's more accepting and inclusive and stuff like that of different ideas and games. And so it is really inspiring to see, just within just kind of the changes. I think that how Black Paper Moon, how it ran on Kickstarter, I think is a good way to even see it as well. People were so excited for an anime kind of style game like that that it went crazy, even though there was like last minute plan change, all of these different reasons why it happened, but it still did fantastic and one of your best Kickstarters because people just want to see that. So I love like hearing that change almost through you talking.
Yeah, yeah. And for those listening, hopefully, you know, I'm not trying to bash this industry or the scene for this or anything. Because as you were saying,
Oh,
yeah,
for
as you
sure.
were saying, it is much better now. And thinking, and I just really haven't thought this through in a while. But yeah, like I haven't really had these issues in recent memory at all. Like anytime I interact with people now on the basis of tabletop games, it seems to be much more friendly. I can't even remember the last time it's been bad, except for like you know back in like 2014, maybe 2015 or something. So it takes me it's a good while back before I can really bring up some of those incidences. But yeah, it's nice to see that there's a lot of different types of tabletop RPGs and people seem to be pretty accepting of different styles and different ways of those being and stuff and just being like hey there's a lot but there's so many more that we can explore and it doesn't have to be a certain
Mhm.
way you know like everyone has their own preferences when it comes to gaming, so it's just cool that there's more options for people there.
Exactly. I feel the same way. And that's kind of where I feel I know the whole, this is going to be a thing. The Wizards of the Coast, OGL stuff, that was a big thing. And a lot of people got scared because it's like, they love D&D, they love playing that game with their friends. It's like, what do we do? I love that happened only for the reason of it brought to light all of the games that are available in the world. It's not just this one. There are so many other games that you can play with your friends, get those same exact experiences without having to play, D&D 5th edition or whatever. Like there are so many other options that also will probably fit your play styles so much better as well. So that's one thing that I kind of appreciate from the OGL situation is it brought to light all of these games, and I feel like people are becoming even more accepting of these games now that it doesn't feel like D&D 5e reigns all.
Yeah, and hopefully that sentiment like keeps carrying forward and even grows from where it's at, because like there are so many people on the casual level that like we're basically trying to get into the industry to show how fun this is, and they don't know what the term tabletop RPG is or TTRPG. They don't know what that means. But if you say, "Oh, like D&D," then they're like, oh, "Okay, I kind of understand what you're saying now." Because I work at a pop culture store where we sell things that are very like similar crowd of people, and I've had multiple instances where people don't know what a tabletop RPG is, but they know what D&D is. So hopefully we'll now have people though going into more varied games and learning what it is, and that is definitely a mission of mine, because speaking of entering into the industry and having some pushback, I already explained how I had pushback because of the anime art style and stuff like that, but without getting super into it, I also had some pushback from Wizards of the Coast themselves. Like the actual company was also giving me some trouble, not because of anime art style, but because they basically wanted something that I had made and they didn't want to pay for it, and they just wanted to sort of bully me and stuff. And so I'm happy that this stuff happened though with Wizards of the Coast, because it shows other people basically their true colors, in my opinion, with that. And they sent the Pinkertons after someone over Magic the Gathering. Like they just people can see that they're very much focused on money and just making as much of that as possible. Like even in 2018, they announced that they are attempting to double their revenue, and it's like, I get as a company, as a business, like you need to make money to pay your employees, to be able to fund to make your games and all this stuff. So I don't fault any company for wanting to make money. However, the difference is when you're already making up like 90% of the market share with D&D for tabletop RPGs, and you're like, yeah, let's double the amount of revenue we're getting. We're under monetized. And it's like you're already like by far the biggest. Like you're not some like small company trying to like double, like with 2 employees trying to double to 4 employees. Like you're like by far the biggest shark in the sea. So it's like, I think that having that mindset of wanting to double when you're already so big, I think only leads you to making poor decisions, because at that point, like the majority of tabletop gamers were already giving them money. And so when you're like, oh, well, we need to make double that, like you can only get that by trying to do basically like underhanded things. There's no other way to sort of go about it at that point.
And then it just gives people a sour taste in their mouth to even then support that company if they start making these bad decisions. Because it's like, you're just doing it for this. You're just doing it for this reason.
Yeah, the trick is like, okay, how far can we push this without getting like a blowback? Because they've probably done, I'm sure, a lot of like public facing things that were like kind of rubbed some people the wrong way a little bit here and there, but nothing that was like major. But obviously they pushed it too far, and I think part of why they pushed it too far is the whole idea of saying, hey, we need to double this within 5 years. I mean, that's what they said in 2018. It's 2023. It's been 5 years. They were trying to double things. So there's only like, you basically have to sort of make like drastic plans to be like, okay, how can we double our money? Well, let's try to monetize this license agreement that we're not supposed to like revoke and stuff. That's questionably not even legal, like that kind of stuff.
Silly decisions.
So yeah. I mean, obviously, like everyone knows it was bad decisions, but it's like I think it's interesting to try to think about like, okay, like obviously a terrible decision, but I think this is like this is what their thinking
Hmm.
process was on it. Obviously, the stupid decision, but I am all for it. I'm okay with it because, like you said, we've now had people that's very interested in trying out new RPGs and just seeing. I mean, there's people that know about that whole situation that wasn't even previously aware of really this whole space that we're in. So it's like cool to see that as well.
Yeah, people just start to get a bit more interest. What's going on? And then they find out
Yeah.
there's so many cool things within this space. There's so many cool games. And personally, I've my roots are completely in D&D. That's D&D 5th edition's the first game I played. I played that for a really long time. I still like to play it, but I'm ready to move on. There are so many more opportunities that fit me and my group and the people that I like to play with that I'm ready to kind of leave, not necessarily leave it behind, but at least take a break and try the new things that I've been finding out, especially through this podcast.
Well, I'm glad that that sort of started and inspired that journey for you. My tough part with that is, I told everyone listening that I started off with a heavy Magic the Gathering background. Like that's a lot of game design
Mhm.
philosophy and stuff I learned from Magic. And there's a lot of their lead designer has a blog where he talks about like different things they've tried, different things that didn't work, why they didn't work, and that's something I've studied, for years, and something that I grew up playing, and to basically like have them do what they do, it like sucks. So like I haven't played Magic since they basically left a bad taste in my mouth, and so I just completely dropped the game. But it is a bit unfortunate because with Magic, there's not really a good alternative at the moment in the TCG market. You have like Yu-Gi-Oh, which is like even the top Yu-Gi-Oh players said that they don't like playing the game currently because it's like basically broken and power crept and just not fun. And then Pokemon is like a whole nother like aesthetic. It's kind of its own thing. And then a lot of the other games, they're just either not fun or they're based off of IP. I don't personally care that much about or whatever. So it's a bit of a struggle, but hey, it basically fuels me to want to design more games and to sort of like, in some ways it's like, well, if I feel burned in this way, I'm sure other people feel burned. So hopefully I can create a game that sort of like can sort of fill in that void. Either be it like something that someone filling in a void that was not currently filled in before, or just like helping just give people an avenue to play games in a different way. Just so we can like focus on having fun and gaming and not worry about like the dumb stuff this company's doing or whatever it may be.
Yeah, absolutely. And ideally, with everything going on, I don't know if anything will ever take the full place of, Magic or D&D, but I think more options will definitely start to happen as things continue on and people start to, because exactly like what you said, you're more inspired to continue making games to try and fill a void there. There are definitely other people that are ready to do that. And I'm excited to see what happens.
Yeah, for sure. If anything, I mean, just these last few years, if it taught us anything, it's that we never know what to expect, and there's bound to be all kinds of stuff that happens that will at least be interesting, if nothing else.
Exactly. And somehow this was a discussion about Black Paper Moon and it's turned into game discussion, which is great. Love when that happens.
Yeah, well, I like I said, I said this before we started the podcast, but I basically was like, yeah, I can definitely go off the rails sometimes of discussing things. Hey, it works very well though when running a tabletop RPG because I definitely don't put my players on rails, and I'm so I don't railroad my players. People get to have fun, and I can definitely roll with what's going on. There tends to be like little moments like to have where it's like, okay, well, let's try to make sure this ties into this in a certain way, but in general, like no one feels eroded, which I think is very important for the players.
Oh, for sure. I find it more fun, especially as a GM, to just roll with the punches. Like, what are you gonna throw at me? You surprise me. I want to work with whatever you come up with. But
Yeah,
yeah, I think, I mean, I just want to say this has been great. I love talking about games, but also just like talking about the culture and the community and the things like that. So I'm always open to these sorts of discussions. So, and I think it's also valuable for people to hear it as well. hear what other people have to say about what has happened. So I think it's valuable, even if it might be, technically off the rails, but, we're all having fun here.
Yeah, that's what's important.
Exactly. I'm trying. So with Black Paper Moon, I think this kind of ties in with the whole, not railroading thing that you just went on, but do you have any advice for people wanting to run Black Paper Moon itself?
Huh. That's actually a pretty good question, and it seems very simple. But I don't think anyone's necessarily asked me that question before, so my brain's just kind of like, do I have advice for people wanting to run Black Paper Moon? So while I very much think you can sort of not run it as like a Solitaire based game or this or that or the other. I do think it could help if you at least watch a little bit of like what inspired it, because even though you could put your own sort of theme on it, like you're thinking origami, like which you can totally do, I think it could definitely help people to sort of like get them into that mindset that I was in when it was like, okay, this is sort of like the main inspiration. So I think having like a little bit of like if you watched a little bit of Soul Eater, a little bit of Konosuba, a little bit of Ruby, and just like seeing sort of those inspirations, I think it could kind of get you more into that headspace of like where I was at, and like, and it kind of put you more like basically where you're like vibing with it, more one to one. Of course,
Absolutely.
yeah, of course though, if you just like the art and you just like the concept of the game and you haven't watched those things, you can still have fun. But I think that's like what I would recommend someone.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think it's important even for any style of game, even if it's, kind of anime inspired or not. Consuming that type of media really does help you run those games truer to their inspiration and what they're trying to, get across. So I think it's easier to run something like Monster of the Week when you've consumed shows that are in that Monster of the Week style, because then you kind of know the formula, the points of drama, how to structure the story. You don't have to, of course, but I think I agree. It makes it easier to get into that mindset and to run those types of stories. So I think that's actually great advice for
Good. I'm happy to hear it.
Black Paper Moon, but I think for any game.
Cool. I also recommend making sure that you have a good soundtrack, like some good music to play, like some stuff that's a bit spooky, a bit fun, like make sure you have the music on lock. It's a bit tricky for me whenever I play, because half the time it's on stream and it's like, there's like I can't really use the music I want to use sometimes, or it's like hard to find like music I have the rights to use and stuff for it. So, because whenever you're streaming, you don't want to use Linkin Park or whatever. Well, that's a bad example, anyways. But you get what I'm saying. There's certain music you can't really use. So,
Mhm.
but yeah,
Actually, where can
yeah,
people
good music.
find your stream?
Yeah, so we have a Twitch channel, which you basically twitch.tv/Vindicate Entertainment, and it will take you there. We stream tabletop RPGs, we stream board games, card games. We even do some video games. We do all kinds of stuff on. It's kind of a variety stream, but we do we do play our Vindicated games and show those off. We sometimes do giveaways. We're going to be doing a Summer Ween stream July 2nd from 8 p.m. EST to 12. And we're going to be giving away over $650 worth of RPGs and art commissions and comics and all kinds of stuff. So it's gonna be crazy. We had never even done like a big giveaway before, and then I somehow ended up with like over $650 worth of stuff to give away. I was like, whoa, okay. so that's
That's
gonna be,
amazing.
yeah.
Congrats.
Thank you. So yeah, that's going to be a bit wild, but if anyone listening wants to head over there for that, at least that stream, and not miss that one, you don't have to pay anything. Basically, just anyone participating within our stream there they'll be entered for a chance to win. And like I said, some of that will be tabletop RPGs. So and then you can check out our page for like the partners that we've announced already. We currently have one more left to announce, which is a tabletop RPG publisher that's also themed around like Halloween and spooky and stuff.
That is super, super exciting. Yeah, please go check this stream out. Go check out, the Vindicated, just company in general, because that's also the name you use for your like publishing your games and TTRPGs, right?
Yeah. And basically, people can go to our main website, vindicatentertainment.com, and then you would see basically all that we do, who we are, what kind of games we have. It's like the perfect spot to just sort of see like the main things of like what we do, and it also has links to everything that you would want to find.
Yes, yes. Please go check that out because just with Black Paper Moon, I'm already excited to start diving into some of your other games and even some of the card games. I've never been a huge like card game person, but it's always been something I've thought about. So I might check those out and see if there's anything fun that I can pressure some
Yeah, well, in that case, I would
friends into.
recommend maybe looking at Guillotine. It is a simple, fun card game that is spooky in itself, and my wife did all the artwork for all the little monsters and creatures in it. And essentially, as you
Adorable.
play the monsters, they each have a numerical value, which might be negative, it might be zero, it might be positive. And the objective is you don't want it to go past 13 on your turn. So essentially, you're trying to survive as you're forced to play a monster card every turn. Every player will play a monster, and it keeps going around and around the table as the marker on the card keeps moving up and down. And if it goes past 13, you're out. But there's special effects in the game, such as like the spirit can basically pull out like another monster from your discard pile and become that. So it changes the number, or you can play a card that will discard a card from your opponent's hand, or you'll switch a player's hand, stuff like that. So that one
Awesome.
for people that like the aesthetic for Black Paper Moon, I think Guillotine is a good card game if you wanted to try one out.
Perfect. I'm definitely going to be checking that out because I'm always down to play games. But yeah, no, this has been amazing. I'm trying to think if there's any other things to touch on. Because I think we're getting close to the end of this episode.
Hmm.
Is there anything that you would like to touch on before we end?
Yeah, so like I said, we are doing the Soul Punk edition later on this year, so people can stay tuned for that. But prior to that, we will be doing another Kickstarter for another tabletop RPG called Death Send, which is inspired by Death Note, which I'm sure you've heard of.
Yes. Very
Essentially,
excited
in
for
Death
that.
Send, it has a very unique mechanic where it plays completely different from Black Paper Moon or other worlds, in that people send their actions through text messaging the game master,
Mm,
and it's meant to be played where people can basically live their own like on their own schedule, and just throughout each day they just would text in their action, and then the game sort of evolves throughout the week as people are sending in their actions and having it resolve. And the idea is
interesting.
one of the players has the power of the Grim Reaper essentially, and uses his power to start killing people, and you're basically trying to figure out like who this person is. You're trying to investigate other people. You're trying to learn information, piece things together, and there's even options for it where like someone can like show up and like kidnap your character and like try to like interrogate you and stuff. But there, I mean, it's like Death Note though, you know, like where there's like there's like conflict that can happen, but it's mostly like investigating, and it's more like a mental battle, like mind games
Yeah,
and such.
that sounds
Yeah,
awesome.
thank you. And so it is very more, and it is weirdly kind of more like PvP, which isn't traditional for tabletop RPGs. But it's like
Mm,
the show where, like, you know, you have people that are trying to work together, but there is someone that is essentially, I guess, like a traitor among you guys, and you're trying to figure out who and trying to figure things out. So it plays like a weird blend of like a RPG, but like a
oh,
texting game and like a board game and stuff.
yeah, almost like social deception a little bit as well.
Yeah, I've had a really hard time trying to explain this game, especially like through text, just because it's kind of like built differently than anything else I've seen. Um,
Hmm.
and the basics of this game came from a game actually released in 2019 called Legendaria, which essentially uses the same mechanics of like texting in your actions and resolving through the week. But the difference is Legendaria is you're playing like a legend throughout history or a mythological figure, and it kind of leads more to these like epic, like climactic like battles. Where you have like
Hmm.
Achilles versus George Washington or something, or you might have like Blackbeard versus like Alice from Wonderland or something. So you have all these like crazy encounters, and you're fighting at Camelot or during the Salem witch trials or something. And so that's like a whole like crazy story in itself. And Legend or Deathsend uses the same basic rule set for that, but it is way less about the battles and these like epic
Mhm.
stories through like kind of weaving your own tales, and it's more about like this sort of like cat and mouse mental deduction type game.
Yeah, no, that sounds really cool. I'm very excited to hear more about that now, because I have again. I've watched Death Note. I understand kind of the whole thing, and so just to even have a chance to play a game that's inspired by that, I think is really cool. So I'm very excited to hear more about that and when it actually comes out. Which you said that is coming out later this year.
Yeah, so I believe I'd probably have to double check my calendar, but we're looking at putting this on Kickstarter like mid-July, so it's coming up pretty
All
quick.
right, perfect.
I haven't even necessarily started promoting it, so this is going to be kind of like a Black Paper Moon scenario where it's going to be very much like that like month before. It's going to get a lot more
Mhm.
attention. So you haven't seen me promote this or really talk about it, but give it about like another week or so, and then you're going to start seeing a lot of things start dialing out and very much like promoting this and putting it on people's radars.
Hell yeah, I'm very excited to see that. But I can't think of anything specific to bring up, and if that is it for you, I think we are at the end of the episode today.
Yeah. Well, real quick, I just thought something
Oh,
else.
all good.
uh, those interested, if you're here because you like anime and tabletop RPGs, we also have a beta that's coming out for a game called Banishment that I've made that uses the Otherworld system, but it's inspired by Yu-Gi-Oh, like the Duel Monsters, like fantasy world that they have going on. So if you're a fan of Yu-Gi-Oh, then check that out. And then we also are doing one for My Hero Academia called Super Breaker. So it's like a super powered one, and they both have a really cool, like unique art style to them. So I found this artist who goes by Rachnos, and he's already had like experience being like a art like leader, like
Mhm.
project lead and stuff. And he is just he's so good to work with, and I think people will really like seeing the way those games turn out based off of his like art design and stuff. But anyways, yeah,
Yeah.
check out vindicaterentertainment.com if you like that kind of stuff because we got a lot going on. And thank you so much for having me on this podcast. It was very fun to discuss everything, and yeah, I had a good time.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a fantastic time as well. Thank you for agreeing to come on. I'm so glad because Hunter actually is the one who suggested for me to talk to you. I'm like, oh, yep, absolutely. Especially when I started to see some of your games. So yes, it's been a pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much for talking about Black Paper Moon. We'll definitely have to talk about you coming on again about some of your other games because they also sound awesome. But yeah, please go check out Vindicated Entertainment. This has been amazing. I'm going to get Black Paper Moon, and you should as well because it sounds fantastic, especially for the spooky season. So, yeah, I think that is the end. So, thank you so much, Vincent, and thank you everyone for listening. Thank you everyone so much for listening to this episode of the RPG Goblin. If you enjoyed it, then please make sure to support us and leave a review on wherever you listen to your podcasts. I really, really appreciate it. Every little bit of support helps keep this podcast going. So, yes, thank you. I absolutely loved talking about Black Paper Moon in this episode. It was such a fantastic TTRPG to explore, and I can't wait to play it for myself. And please get the game if you haven't. If you enjoyed Vincent and would love to see more from him, please make sure to follow him at Vincent Entertainment on all social medias and check out his Twitch and his actual store, which is Vindicated Entertainment, where you can actually buy his TTRPGs and also card games. I just want to say thank you again, Vincent, for coming on and talking with me. This was fantastic, and I just really appreciate it. The next episode of the RPG Goblin will be coming out Friday, August 4th. Yeah. The next episode of the RPG Goblin will be coming out Friday, August 4th, and it will be about adding horror in TTRPGs. Another TTRPG topic, which again, I love doing, so I'm so glad that I can do another one of these. And we will be talking about how to add in horror into your own TTRPG games, whether they be home games or even if you want to do an actual play. and the elements of horror, and how you don't necessarily need to scare your players for it to be good horror. So if that sounds great, then I really recommend listening to this next episode as I bring on Danny from the Thorn Files podcast, a Monster of the Week actual play, and we talk about adding horror into TTRPGs. So keep an eye out for when that episode comes out, August 4th, and I'll see you then.